Have you ever thought you knew everything about someone you loved, only to discover that their entire life was a mystery you never bothered to uncover? I'm a wealthy man, successful by every measure society values, and yet standing at my daughter's grave on that cold November morning, I realized I knew nothing about the person she truly was. My name doesn't matter, but what happened that day changed everything I thought I understood about love, family, and the price we pay for our pride. I had buried my daughter 6 months earlier, and every Sunday without fail, I would drive my Mercedes to the cemetery, park in my usual spot away from the common graves, and walk the manicured path to where Emily rested under an elegant granite headstone that cost more than most people earn in a year. I told myself that this ritual proved I was a good father, that my consistent visits demonstrated a love that transcended death. But if I'm being honest with myself now, those visits were more about maintaining an image, about fulfilling what I believed was my duty as a grieving father from a respectable family. That particular Sunday started like all the others, with me adjusting my expensive suit jacket, carrying fresh white roses that matched the pristine marble, and preparing to spend my obligatory 15 minutes in silent contemplation before heading to the country club for brunch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant rain, and the cemetery was typically empty at this early hour, which was exactly how I preferred it. I've never been comfortable with displays of raw emotion, with the messy, uncontrolled grief that other people seem to wear so publicly. My sorrow was private, dignified, contained behind the walls I had spent a lifetime constructing. But as I approached Emily's grave that morning, I noticed something unusual, something that immediately disrupted my carefully maintained composure. There was someone there, sitting on the ground right in front of my daughter's headstone, and this wasn't just any visitor. It was a young man, probably in his late 20s, wearing dirty construction clothes covered in concrete dust and paint stains, his work boots caked with mud that was now smearing the grass around Emily's grave. His shoulders were shaking violently, and I could hear the sound of his sobbing even from several feet away, a raw, desperate sound that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. And there, sitting in his lap, was a small child, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 2 years old, with curly dark hair and chubby fingers that were reaching up to touch the man's tear-stained face. My first reaction, I'm ashamed to admit, wasn't concern or compassion. It was anger. How dare this stranger, this working-class nobody in filthy clothes, presume to cry at my daughter's grave? How dare he bring a child to disturb the sanctity of this place, to mar the perfect grass with his muddy boots and his unrestrained emotional display? I felt my jaw clench, felt that familiar surge of indignation that had always come so easily to me, that sense of territorial possessiveness that made me believe I had exclusive rights to mourn my own daughter. I approached them with purposeful strides, my leather shoes clicking against the stone path, my roses held like a weapon in my hand. The man must have heard me coming because he looked up, and in that moment, I saw something in his red, swollen eyes that stopped me cold. It wasn't fear or guilt or embarrassment. It was a grief so profound, so utterly devastating, that it mirrored something I had been refusing to acknowledge in myself for the past 6 months. But I pushed that recognition aside, armoring myself with righteous fury instead. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cold and sharp as winter steel, "but this is a private family grave. I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing here, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Immediately." The young man stared at me for a long moment, his arms tightening protectively around the little girl, who had turned her enormous brown eyes toward me with curiosity rather than fear. Those eyes, I realized with a jolt that felt like ice water in my veins, were exactly the same shade as Emily's eyes, the same unusual mixture of amber and chocolate that I used to see every morning at the breakfast table before she moved out, before she stopped calling, before she disappeared from my life in every way except the monthly transfers I made to her bank account, the only form of connection I had known how to maintain. "You must be Mr. Harrison," the man said quietly, his voice hoarse from crying, and the fact that he knew my name only intensified my confusion and anger. "I'm Marcus Reeves, and this," he shifted the child slightly so I could see her better, "this is Lily, your granddaughter." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and making the entire cemetery seem to tilt on its axis. Granddaughter. The word felt foreign, impossible. like a language I had never learned to speak. Emily had been pregnant. Emily had a child, and I knew nothing about it. The roses slipped from my fingers, falling onto the grass in a scatter of white petals that looked like small surrenders against the green. "That's impossible," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded distant as if someone else was speaking through my mouth. Emily would have told me. She would have, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Emily wouldn't have told me. Emily had stopped telling me anything years ago, after I made it clear that I disapproved of her choices, her art school dreams, her desire to live in a small apartment in the city instead of the mansion I had prepared for her, after I told her she was throwing away her future, wasting the opportunities I had provided, embarrassing the family name with her bohemian fantasies. The last real conversation we'd had, I realized with sickening clarity, had been an argument. She had called to invite me to some art exhibition, her voice bright with excitement, and I had told her I was too busy, that her hobbies weren't a priority when I had real business to handle. I heard the hurt in her silence, but I didn't apologize, didn't soften, didn't realize that I was slowly, methodically pushing away the only person who had ever really mattered to me. Marcus was standing now, holding Lily against his hip with the practiced ease of someone who had been caring for her since birth. He looked at me with something that might have been pity, which only made my humiliation more complete. "She didn't tell you because she knew what you would say," he said simply, stating a truth that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "She knew you would see me as beneath her, that you would demand she get rid of the baby, that you would make her choose between her family and her life. So she chose her life, Mr. Harrison. She chose love and happiness and a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where we painted the walls ourselves and ate dinner on furniture we found at thrift stores. She chose me, and she chose Lily, and she was happier in those 3 years than she had been in all the time before, living in your mansion and trying to be the daughter you wanted instead of the person she was. Have you ever been confronted with a truth so devastating that it physically hurt to hear it? Comment below if you've ever realized you were the villain in someone else's story." I stood there frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, while this stranger, this construction worker who had apparently known my daughter better than I ever did, held my granddaughter and spoke truths I wasn't prepared to hear. Lily was squirming now, reaching her small hands toward Emily's headstone, making soft babbling sounds that might have been words or might have been just the musical nonsense that toddlers speak. Marcus set her down gently, keeping one hand on her back to steady her as she toddled forward on unsteady legs, her tiny fingers touching the engraved letters of her mother's name. The sight of it, this small child connecting with a mother she would never remember, finally broke through the armor I had been wearing, and I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been frozen solid for longer than I cared to admit. "How did she die?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, and I realized with shame that I had never asked before, that I had accepted the hospital's brief explanation, cardiac arrest, sudden and unexpected, and I had planned the funeral without ever investigating further, without ever wondering what circumstances had led to my 30-year-old daughter having a heart attack. Marcus's face darkened with fresh pain, and he wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his cheekbone. "She had a heart condition," he said quietly, watching Lily trace the letters with her small fingers. "Something congenital that she never knew about because she stopped going to doctors after she left your house. She couldn't afford good health insurance, not on what she made from her art and what I brought in from construction work. We were saving up, planning to get her properly checked out, but then she got pregnant with Lily, and all our money went to prenatal care and preparing for the baby. After Lily was born, Emily kept saying she felt fine, that she was just tired like any new mother, and we believed her because we wanted to believe her. We thought we had time. We thought we could handle everything ourselves, that we didn't need help from anyone, especially not from you." The accusation in his words was unmistakable, and it landed like a fist to my gut because I knew it was justified. I had money, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, sitting in accounts and investments while my daughter scraped by, while she neglected her health because she couldn't afford to do otherwise. And why hadn't she asked me for help? Because I had made it clear through years of criticism and conditional love that my support came with strings attached, that accepting anything from me meant accepting my control, my judgment, my vision of who she should be. I had spent decades building walls of wealth and status, and in the process, I had walled out the only person I should have been protecting. She collapsed at home, Marcus continued, his voice breaking as he relived the memory. I was at work and Lily was napping. A neighbor heard the fall and called 911, but by the time they got there, by the time I got to the hospital, she was gone. Just gone. And suddenly I was alone with a 14-month-old baby, trying to figure out how to be both parents, how to work enough hours to pay rent while also being there for Lily, how to explain to a toddler why Mama wasn't coming home. Emily's friends helped at first, but they have their own lives, their own problems. I've been doing this alone for 6 months now, working double shifts when I can get them, paying a neighbor to watch Lily when I'm at construction sites, crying in the shower so Lily doesn't see, and coming here every Sunday because this is the only place I can talk to Emily, the only place where I feel like she might hear me and tell me I'm doing okay, that I'm not failing our daughter the way. He stopped himself, but the unspoken words hung in the air between us. The way you failed yours. The way I failed Emily. The truth of it settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. I had failed her. I had loved her in my own limited, conditional way, but I had failed to see her, to know her, to support the person she actually was rather than the person I wanted her to be. I had let my pride and my prejudices and my narrow definition of success blind me to what really mattered, and now she was gone, and I would never have the chance to apologize, to tell her I was wrong, to ask for her forgiveness. Lily had moved away from the headstone now and was looking up at me with those heartbreaking, familiar eyes, her head tilted to one side as if she was trying to figure out who I was and why I looked so sad. She took a tentative step toward me, then another, her small arms reaching up in that universal gesture that children make when they want to be held. My hands trembled as I bent down, uncertain and terrified, having forgotten in the years since Emily was small what it felt like to hold a child. But Lily didn't wait for my hesitation to resolve itself. She simply walked into my arms with the trusting confidence of a toddler who had been loved unconditionally from birth, and wrapped her small arms around my neck, and pressed her soft cheek against mine. The feeling of her warm, solid weight in my arms, the baby smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing so close to my ear, it demolished the last of my defenses completely. I sank down onto the grass, not caring that my expensive suit pants were getting stained, not caring that I was crying in full view of anyone who might pass by, not caring about anything except this small miracle of a child who existed because my daughter had been brave enough to choose love over comfort, authenticity over approval. Marcus sat down beside me, and for a long while, we just existed there together in our shared grief. Two men who had both loved Emily, who had both lost her, connected now by this beautiful child who carried her mother's eyes and her mother's spirit. Tell me about her, I finally managed to say, my voice thick with tears. Tell me about who she really was, about the life you built together. Tell me everything I was too proud and too stubborn to see while she was alive. And so Marcus began to talk, and I listened, really listened, in a way I hadn't listened in years. He told me about the first time he met Emily at a community art fair, where she was selling her paintings and he had stopped to admire her work. How she had laughed at his clumsy attempts to sound knowledgeable about art and had offered to teach him the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism if he'd buy her coffee. He told me about their tiny apartment with its cracked plaster walls that Emily had transformed into a gallery, painting murals of flowers and birds and fantastical creatures that she said represented different emotions. He told me about Sunday mornings when they would make pancakes together, while Emily sang off-key to old jazz records, about how she would fall asleep with sketchbooks on her chest, about how she cried tears of joy when she found out she was pregnant because she had always worried that her medical history might make it impossible. He told me about Lily's birth, about how Emily had insisted on natural childbirth despite the risks, about how she had been so tired afterward but so radiant, holding their daughter and whispering promises about all the art they would make together, all the beauty she would show her, all the unconditional love she would provide because she knew what it felt like to grow up without it. That last part hit me like a knife to the heart because I knew he was talking about me, about my failure to love Emily the way she deserved. But Marcus wasn't saying it with cruelty. He was just stating facts, sharing the reality of the life I had missed, the joy I had sacrificed on the altar of my pride. He told me about Emily's art, how she had started getting recognition from small galleries, how she was finally beginning to make real money from her paintings, how she had been planning to surprise me by inviting me to her first major exhibition. She never stopped loving you, Marcus said, looking directly at me with those honest, working-class eyes that saw through all my pretenses. Even after everything, even after you made it clear you disapproved of me, of us, of the choices she made, she still loved you. She used to say that maybe someday you would understand, that maybe when you were older and ready to let go of all your rules about how life should look, you might be willing to actually see her. She kept hoping you would call, that you would reach out with something other than money transfers, that you would ask about her life instead of lecturing her about wasted potential. She showed me pictures of you from when she was little, told me stories about how you used to take her to the park, how you taught her to ride a bike, how you weren't always so cold and distant. She said you changed after her mother died, that you buried yourself in work and ambition and forgot how to just be a person, how to connect without transactions and conditions attached. He was right, of course. My wife's death when Emily was 12 had broken something in me, and instead of healing, instead of drawing closer to my daughter who had also lost her mother, I had retreated into the world of business where everything made sense, where success was measurable, where I could control outcomes through hard work and strategic planning. I had turned Emily into another project to manage rather than a person to love, and when she refused to follow my carefully laid plans, I had seen it as a failure rather than as her necessary journey toward authentic selfhood. The sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the cemetery, and other visitors were beginning to arrive for their own Sunday rituals of remembrance. Lily had fallen asleep in my arms, her thumb in her mouth, her dark curls soft against my chest, and I held her with a tenderness I hadn't known I was still capable of feeling. Marcus watched us with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between hope and fear, and I realized he was waiting for something, waiting to see what I would do with this information. This unexpected grandchild, this complicated situation that didn't fit into any of my carefully organized categories. You look exhausted, I said finally, noticing for the first time the dark circles under his eyes, the gauntness of his cheeks, the way his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. When was the last time you had a full night's sleep, or a decent meal that wasn't eaten standing up over a sink? Marcus gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. Sleep is a luxury I can't afford, he said, rubbing his face with both hands. I work 6 days a week on construction sites, sometimes 10-hour shifts, sometimes longer when overtime is available. Sundays I'm with Lily all day, trying to be present, trying to be enough. The neighbor who watches her, Mrs. Chen, she's kind and patient, but she's 73 and she's doing me a favor not running a daycare. I pay her what I can, but it's not enough for what she does. And I know it. I'm behind on rent, behind on utilities, living on credit cards that are maxed out and rice and beans that Lily is starting to refuse because even a 2-year-old can only eat the same thing so many times before they rebel. Emily's medical bills are still coming in, collections agencies calling at all hours, and I can't afford a lawyer to help me figure out if I even owe what they say I owe. I sold everything we had of value months ago. Her engagement ring that belonged to my grandmother, my truck that I bought before Lily was born, my guitar, my tools, everything except Emily's paintings because those belong to Lily. Those are her inheritance from her mother, and I will starve before I sell those. The rawness of his confession, the complete absence of self-pity despite the obvious desperation of his circumstances, stirred something in me that I thought had atrophied years ago. This man, this construction worker I had initially dismissed as unworthy of my daughter, was fighting with everything he had to honor Emily's memory and protect their child. Asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply enduring because he had no other choice. He was demonstrating a kind of love I had never understood, a love that wasn't about providing material advantages or ensuring social status, but about showing up every day, about sacrifice without resentment, about putting someone else's needs before your own without keeping score or demanding gratitude. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. You could have kept Lily a secret. You could have let me go on visiting this grave in my ignorance. Why reveal yourself? Why show me what I've been missing? Marcus looked at me with those tired, honest eyes and said something that shattered what was left of my carefully constructed worldview. Because Emily made me promise, he said simply. The night before she died, she had this feeling, this premonition maybe, and she made me swear that if anything ever happened to her, I would make sure you knew about Lily. She said that despite everything, despite your failures as a father, you deserve to know your granddaughter. And more importantly, Lily deserved to know she had a grandfather. She said you were a deeply flawed man who confused money with love and control with protection, but that underneath all that armor, there was a person who had once known how to be soft, who had once known how to play and laugh and love without conditions. She believed that becoming a grandfather might give you a second chance, might open something in you that had closed when her mother died. I thought she was being too generous, too forgiving, but I promised, because I loved her, and because you can't refuse the dying even when you think they're wrong. The weight of Emily's forgiveness, delivered through this man I had prejudged and dismissed, was almost more than I could bear. She had seen me clearly, had understood my faults and my limitations, and yet she had still believed in the possibility of my redemption. She had given me this gift of knowledge, this opportunity to meet my granddaughter, not because I deserved it, but because she loved me anyway in spite of everything, in spite of how many people in this world are loved like that, with such clear-eyed grace, and how many of us are foolish enough to squander such love while we still have time to receive it. I looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms, this child who existed because Emily had been brave enough to choose her own path, and I felt the full crushing weight of all the years I had wasted, all the moments I had missed, all the love I had refused because it didn't come packaged in the way I expected. But I also felt something else stirring beneath the regret, something that felt dangerously like hope, like possibility, like the faint whisper of a second chance I didn't deserve, but was being offered anyway. "What do you need?" I asked Marcus, and this time there was no coldness in my voice, no condescension or judgment, just a simple question from one father to another. "Money for rent? Help with the medical bills? Better childcare for Lily? I have resources and I would like to help if you'll let me." I saw the conflict play across Marcus's face, the pride warring with desperation, the fear of accepting help from someone who had already proven himself capable of using money as a weapon. But there was also something else there, a flicker of relief so profound it made me realize just how close to the edge he had been operating, how near he was to complete collapse under the weight of responsibilities no one should have to carry alone. "I don't want your charity," he said finally, his voice firm despite the trembling in his hands. "And I especially don't want you to use money to try to take Lily away from me, to argue that you can provide her with a better life in your mansion, with your country club connections, and your private schools." Emily was terrified of that, terrified that if you ever found out about Lily, you would use your wealth and your lawyers to argue that I'm an unfit father, that a construction worker with debt and a small apartment can't properly care for a child who deserves marble floors and trust funds. The fact that he had articulated my exact initial impulse, the thought that had flashed through my mind the moment I saw this dirty working-class man sitting at my daughter's grave, filled me with shame so deep I could taste it, because he was right. My first instinct had been to see him as inadequate, to see his financial struggles as proof of unworthiness, to believe that money could solve problems that actually required something much more valuable and much harder to provide: presence, patience, unconditional love. "I'm not going to try to take Lily from you," I said, and as I spoke the words, I realized I meant them completely. "You're her father. You're the one she knows, the one she trusts, the one who has been showing up for her every single day since Emily died. I may have money, but you have something far more important. You have her heart, and Emily trusted you with her most precious gift, which means I should too." I saw the tension in Marcus's shoulders ease slightly, saw the way he exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for months. "But I would like to help," I continued carefully, choosing my words with more thought than I had given to any business negotiation. "Not to take over, not to control, not to turn Lily into a project or an investment, but to support you both in whatever way would actually be useful. Pay off the medical bills so you stop getting those calls. Cover the rent so you're not constantly worried about eviction. Set up proper childcare with someone qualified so Mrs. Chen can retire from babysitting duties and you can stop worrying every time you're running late from a job site. And maybe, if you would allow it, I could spend time with Lily, get to know her, learn how to be a grandfather in a way I never learned how to be a father." Marcus studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for his judgment in a way I had never waited for anyone's approval. Strange how the opinion of a construction worker I had met less than an hour ago had become more important to me than the respect of all the business associates and country club members I had spent decades trying to impress. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you help now after years of wanting nothing to do with Emily's real life? Is it guilt? Is it about easing your conscience so you can tell yourself you're not a complete failure as a father and a human being? Because if that's what this is about, if you're trying to buy forgiveness for all the years you rejected your daughter, then I don't want it, and neither does Lily. The blunt honesty of his question deserved an equally honest answer, and I found myself speaking truths I had barely admitted to myself. Yes, I said quietly. It's partly guilt. It's definitely guilt. I'm standing here holding my granddaughter who I never knew existed, learning that my daughter died partly because she couldn't afford proper medical care, while I have more money than I know what to do with. Realizing that I spent years pushing away the one person who mattered most because she didn't fit into my rigid ideas about success and respectability. Of course I feel guilty. I should feel guilty. I failed Emily in every way that matters, and I can't fix that now because she's gone and I'll never have the chance to apologize or make it right. But it's more than guilt. I paused, trying to find words for feelings I had spent decades suppressing and ignoring. Holding Lily, listening to you talk about Emily's life, the happiness she found with you, the art she created, the love she felt. It's breaking open something in me that I didn't even know was closed. I've spent so many years being hard, being untouchable, being the man who controlled everything and felt nothing, and I'm suddenly realizing how empty that existence has been, how much I've missed, how much of life I've refused to experience because I was too afraid or too proud or too convinced that my way was the only right way. Emily gave me this gift, this knowledge of Lily's existence, even though I didn't deserve it, even though I had rejected her again and again. She believed I was capable of change, of growth, of learning to love without conditions. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe I'm too old, too set in my ways, too damaged by my own choices. But I would like to try, not to ease my conscience, not to feel better about myself, but because I genuinely want to know this child who carries my daughter's eyes, who exists because Emily was brave enough to choose authenticity over approval. I want to learn what love actually means from a man who demonstrates it every day, through sacrifice and dedication, rather than through bank transfers and material provisions. Can you remember a moment when you realized you needed to fundamentally change who you were? Tell me about it in the comments. Marcus was quiet for a long time, absently picking at the grass, his eyes distant as he processed what I had said. Lily stirred in my arms, making small sleepy sounds, and I instinctively adjusted my hold on her, surprised by how natural it felt, how right, to protect this small person who shared my blood, but not my brokenness, at least not yet. Emily used to say that everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Marcus said finally, his voice soft with memory. She believed in second chances, in the possibility that people could change if they were given the right reasons and the right support. It drove me crazy sometimes how forgiving she was, how willing to see the good in people who had hurt her. But that optimism, that faith in human potential, it was part of what made her so special, so able to see beauty everywhere, even in broken things, even in you. He looked at me directly then, and I saw a tentative softening in his expression, a willingness to consider possibilities he had been protecting himself against. If I agree to let you help, he said carefully, it has to be with clear boundaries. You don't get to make decisions about how Lily is raised. You don't get to criticize my parenting or my lifestyle or tell me she needs things I can't provide. You don't get to show up whenever it's convenient for you and then disappear for weeks when something more important comes up. If you're going to be in her life, you're going to be consistently in her life, not as a wealthy benefactor who drops by occasionally with expensive gifts, but as a grandfather who shows up, who invests time and attention, who loves her for who she is, rather than who you want her to become. Can you do that? Can you be that person? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of all my past failures, all the ways I had already proven myself incapable of the kind of love he was describing. But I thought about Emily, about the little girl she had been before I had buried myself in work and ambition, before I had forgotten how to see her as a person, rather than an extension of my own expectations. I thought about the moments I had missed, the art exhibitions I had been too busy to attend, the phone calls I had let go to voicemail, the gradual erosion of our connection through thousands of small rejections and dismissals. I thought about Marcus's exhaustion, about the impossible burden he was carrying alone, about Lily growing up without knowing that she had family beyond her devoted father, without understanding where half her DNA came from, without access to the stories and memories that connected her to her mother's history. And I thought about Emily's final gift to me, her belief that I was capable of change, her willingness to give me a chance I absolutely did not deserve. I don't know, I answered honestly, meeting Marcus's eyes without flinching. I've spent decades being the kind of person you're describing, controlling and conditional and emotionally unavailable. I've used money as a substitute for actual engagement, treated relationships like business transactions, measured my worth by achievements rather than connections. Can I change all of that overnight because I'm holding a sleeping toddler and feeling emotions I've spent years suppressing? I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I want to try. I want to learn how to be the grandfather Emily believed I could be, the person who shows up not with lectures and conditions but with presence and patience. I will probably fail sometimes. I will probably revert to old patterns and say the wrong things and struggle with letting go of control. But if you're willing to be patient with me, to call me out when I'm being impossible, to give me the chance to prove that people in their 60s can actually learn new ways of being human, then I promise to do everything in my power to be worthy of Lily's love and Emily's faith in me. Lily woke up then, as if she had been listening to our conversation and waiting for the right moment to participate. She sat up in my arms, rubbing her eyes with small fists, and looked around with that momentary confusion toddlers have when they wake in unfamiliar situations. Her eyes found Marcus first, and she reached for him with a cry of, "Dada!" that made my heart clench with recognition of their bond, their mutual dependence, the reality that he was her primary attachment figure, and I was just a stranger with familiar eyes. Marcus took her gently, settling her against his hip with practiced ease, and she immediately relaxed, secure in his arms in a way she hadn't been in mine. It was a reminder, sharp and clear, that biology doesn't equal family, that love is built through consistency and care, rather than shared DNA. But as Marcus held her, Lily turned her head to look at me with curious eyes, and she pointed one small finger at me and said something that sounded like a question in whatever private language toddlers speak before words become fully formed. "That's your grandfather," Marcus told her gently, and I heard the weight in his voice, the decision he was making in real time to give me this chance despite his justified skepticism. "That's Mama's daddy. Would you like to say hello?" Lily considered this information with the seriousness that young children bring to new social situations, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Then she leaned forward in Marcus's arms, reaching one hand toward me, and when I extended my hand to meet hers, she wrapped her tiny fingers around my index finger and held on tight. The gesture was so simple, so ordinary, the kind of thing that happens thousands of times a day between children and adults everywhere. But for me in that moment, it felt like a covenant, a promise, a bridge being built across the chasm of all my mistakes and failures. Here was Emily's daughter, the child I hadn't known existed until an hour ago, choosing to connect with me despite having no reason to trust me, offering me the kind of unconditional acceptance I had never given her mother. "Hi, Lily," I said, my voice breaking on her name. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. I'm so sorry I never got to meet your mama when she was your age, that I missed so much of her life because I was too stubborn and too stupid to understand what actually mattered. But if you'll let me, if your daddy agrees, I would very much like to be part of your life now. I would like to tell you stories about your mother, show you pictures of her when she was little, help you understand where you come from and who loved you even before you were born. Would that be okay?" Lily didn't answer in words, but she didn't let go of my finger either, and somehow that felt like enough, like a beginning at least, like the first tentative step on a journey I had no idea how to navigate but was desperately committed to attempting. Marcus watched this interaction with an expression that mixed hope and fear and resignation, and I understood that he was taking an enormous risk, opening himself and Lily to the possibility of being hurt by me the way Emily had been hurt, trusting that I might actually be capable of the change I was promising. "There's a diner about 2 blocks from here," Marcus said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing fancy, but they have decent coffee and breakfast that doesn't cost a week's salary. Would you like to come with us? We could talk more about what this arrangement might look like, what boundaries we need, what kind of relationship you're hoping to build with Lily. No promises yet, no commitments, just conversation and maybe some pancakes that Lily will probably wear more than she eats." The invitation was so simple, so ordinary, so completely unlike the kinds of interactions I usually had, which took place in expensive restaurants or boardrooms or country clubs where the waiters knew my name and my preferences. A diner 2 blocks from the cemetery, with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. A place where Marcus felt comfortable, where he probably came regularly with Lily, where they had routines and familiar servers and the kind of community that forms in working-class neighborhoods. And he was inviting me into that space, giving me access to his world, testing whether I could exist outside my bubble of wealth and privilege and actually connect with people whose lives looked nothing like mine. I would like that very much, I said, and meant it more sincerely than I had meant anything in years. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for keeping Emily's promise even though you had every reason not to. Thank you for being the kind of father and partner she deserved, the kind of person who demonstrates love through actions rather than just words or money transfers. Marcus nodded, not quite smiling, but not quite as guarded as he had been, and he shifted Lily in his arms as he stood up, brushing grass off his work pants. I stood too, looking down at Emily's grave one more time, at the expensive granite and the white roses I had dropped, and I felt a shift in my understanding of what this place meant. It wasn't just a marker of loss and failure anymore. It was also a place where I had been given an unexpected gift, where I had met my granddaughter, where I had begun to understand what Emily had been trying to tell me all along about the difference between existing and actually living. I love you, baby girl, I whispered to the headstone, words I hadn't spoken often enough when Emily was alive. Thank you for Lily. Thank you for believing I could change. Thank you for loving me anyway, even when I made it so hard. I promise I'll try to be better. I promise I'll take care of them both, not by controlling or managing or throwing money at problems, but by actually showing up, by learning to love the way you tried to teach me. I'm so sorry I didn't understand before it was too late. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the trees that surrounded the cemetery, and I chose to believe it was Emily acknowledging my words, forgiving me the way she had apparently already forgiven me when she made Marcus promise to introduce me to Lily. We walked together toward the cemetery entrance, an unlikely trio, a wealthy business executive in an expensive suit with grass stains on the knees, an exhausted construction worker in dirty clothes, and a 2-year-old girl who had no idea that her grandfather had just been introduced to the possibility of becoming human again. As we reached the parking lot, Marcus paused, looking at my Mercedes with the kind of careful blankness that people use when they're trying not to show judgment. I take the bus, he said simply. Can't afford the insurance and maintenance on a car right now. The diner is accessible by transit. We could meet you there in about 20 minutes if you want to drive yourself. I looked at my Mercedes, at the symbol of everything I had valued for so long, the material success that I had believed proved my worth. And then I looked at Marcus, at the way he held Lily with such casual protectiveness, at the exhaustion and integrity written in every line of his face, at the man who had nothing material but everything that actually mattered. Could we ride the bus together? I asked, and I saw surprise flash across Marcus's face. I can't remember the last time I took public transit, probably decades. It might be good for me to remember what that's like, to exist in the world the way most people do rather than in the insulated bubble I've been living in. Marcus studied me for a long moment, perhaps trying to determine if I was serious, or if this was some kind of patronizing gesture, a rich man slumming for the morning before returning to his comfortable life. But whatever he saw in my expression must have satisfied him, because he gave a short nod and said, "The bus stop is this way. Fair warning, it's crowded on Sunday mornings and there's no guarantee of seats and it smells like a combination of old French fries and industrial cleaner. Still interested? Lead the way," I said, and I meant it, even though part of me was screaming about germs and crowds and the indignity of standing in a packed bus. I was tired of that voice. Tired of the part of me that measured everything by comfort and status. Tired of missing life because I was too busy protecting myself from authentic experience. We walked to the bus stop, and while we waited, Lily entertained herself by pointing at birds and cars and clouds, narrating the world in her mixture of real words and improvised language. Marcus translated occasionally, telling me that "buh" meant bird and "caca" meant car, and I found myself enchanted by her observations, by the way she found wonder in ordinary things, by the reminder that the world is actually full of miracles if you bother to look for them instead of rushing past them to the next meeting or transaction. The bus arrived, loud and belching exhaust, and we climbed aboard into the crush of Sunday travelers, People heading to work or church or brunch or family obligations. Marcus pulled out a well-worn transit pass and paid for Lily, and I fumbled with unfamiliar bills for my own fare, aware that everyone was watching this man in an expensive suit who clearly didn't belong in this space. But nobody said anything, and eventually people returned to their own conversations and phones and thoughts, and I found myself standing in the aisle, holding onto an overhead strap for balance, trying not to fall into other passengers as the bus lurched through traffic. Marcus had managed to snag a seat and pulled Lily onto his lap, and I stood near them, close enough to see the way she leaned against his chest, trusting him completely to keep her safe in this crowded, noisy, uncomfortable space. This was his life, I realized with striking clarity. This was the daily reality he navigated while I complained about traffic from the climate-controlled comfort of my luxury vehicle. This was what Emily had chosen when she chose love over money, authenticity over comfort, and I was beginning to understand that it might have actually been the wiser choice, the braver choice, the choice that led to actual happiness, rather than just the appearance of success. The diner, when we finally arrived, was exactly as Marcus had described. Nothing fancy, with red vinyl booths and a long counter with spinning stools, walls covered in faded photographs of local sports teams and outdated advertisements, floors worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. The smell of coffee and bacon and maple syrup hung in the air, and a tired-looking waitress who might have been 40 or 60 called out, "Hey Marcus, hey Lilybean," the moment we walked through the door. "The usual?" she asked, already pulling out her order pad, and Marcus nodded gratefully. She noticed me then, did a visible double-take at my expensive suit and out-of-place presence, but recovered quickly with the professionalism of someone who has seen everything in 20 years of serving food. "And for you, hun?" she asked, handing me a plastic-covered menu with mysterious stains. I looked at the menu, at the simple offerings with their remarkably low prices, and I tried to remember the last time I had eaten food from a place like this. "I'll have what they're having," I said, handing back the menu, and Marcus looked at me with something that might have been approval. "2 more usual specials, then," the waitress confirmed. "That's 2 coffees, 1 milk for Lily, 3 orders of pancakes with eggs and bacon, hash browns, and toast. Y'all find a seat and I'll bring it out when it's ready." We slid into a booth, Marcus and Lily on one side, me on the other, and for a moment we just sat there in slightly awkward silence, not quite sure how to begin this strange new relationship we were tentatively constructing. Lily broke the tension by reaching across the table and patting my hand with her small palm, a gesture of such simple kindness that I felt my eyes prickle with tears I refused to let fall in public. "She does that when she thinks someone is sad," Marcus explained quietly. "Emily used to do the same thing. She had this way of sensing other people's emotions, of wanting to comfort and connect, even with strangers. I guess Lily inherited that from her. Emily was like that even as a child," I heard myself say, the memory rising unbidden from some locked compartment of my mind. "She used to follow me around the house, trying to cheer me up after my wife died, bringing me her stuffed animals and saying they would make me feel better. She was only 12, grieving her own mother, and she was more concerned about my emotional state than her own. I should have appreciated that, should have honored that incredible empathy instead of pushing her away and telling her I needed to work, that feelings were distractions from the important business of life. God, what an idiot I was." Marcus didn't disagree, but he didn't gloat either. He just listened, giving me space to articulate regrets I had been avoiding for decades. "What changed you?" he asked. "After your wife died, I mean. Emily said you used to be different before that. Warmer, more present. What happened?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Fear," I said simply. "When Sarah died, suddenly and unexpectedly, just like Emily did, it shattered my illusion of control. I had been so confident that I could manage everything, that with enough planning and money and effort I could protect my family from any harm. And then cancer took my wife in 6 months, from diagnosis to death, and nothing I did mattered. No amount of money or connections or desperate bargaining could change that outcome. So I decided on some unconscious level that if I couldn't control death, I would control everything else. I would work harder, make more money, build bigger walls, become untouchable, and I would make sure Emily was prepared to survive in a harsh world by teaching her to be tough, to be strategic, to prioritize security over sentiment. I thought I was protecting her, teaching her important lessons. I was actually just inflicting my trauma on her and calling it parenting. The waitress arrived with our food, plates piled high with pancakes and eggs and bacon, and a small plastic cup of milk for Lily with a lid and a straw. Marcus cut Lily's pancakes into small pieces and let her eat with her hands, unbothered by the mess she was making, focused entirely on making sure she was happy and fed. I watched them, this easy intimacy of care, and I felt a sharp pang of envy for the relationship they had, the trust and affection that couldn't be bought or demanded, but only earned through consistent, patient presence. We ate in companionable silence for a while, and I had to admit that the simple diner food was better than half the overpriced meals I had consumed at five-star restaurants while making business deals and impressing clients. Maybe it was the company, or maybe I was finally learning to appreciate things for what they actually were rather than what they cost or symbolized. "So what now?" Marcus asked eventually, wiping syrup off Lily's face with a napkin. "You said you wanted to help, wanted to be part of Lily's life. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I need specifics, not just good intentions. I need to know if you're going to follow through or disappear the moment this gets inconvenient or uncomfortable." "Fair enough," I said, appreciating his directness. "First, I want to handle the immediate financial pressures you're dealing with. The medical bills, the back rent, the credit card debt. I know you said you didn't want charity, but think of it this way. Emily was my responsibility. If I had been the father she deserved, if I had stayed connected to her life, I would have made sure she had good health insurance and access to proper medical care. My failure to do that contributed to her death. So let me correct that error, not to buy forgiveness, but to remove the crushing financial burden that's preventing you from being the father you want to be. Let me clear the debts so you can breathe, so you can work reasonable hours instead of killing yourself with double shifts, so you can be present for Lily instead of being constantly stressed about money." I saw Marcus's jaw clench, saw him struggling with pride and practicality, with the fear of accepting help from someone he didn't fully trust yet. "I'll hire a lawyer to review all the medical bills," I continued before he could refuse. "Half the time those things are inflated or incorrectly billed. We'll contest what needs to be contested and pay what's actually owed. Everything will be done transparently, with your full knowledge and consent. No surprises, no strings attached, no using money as leverage later. Consider it Emily's inheritance, the help I should have provided when she was alive." "And the rest?" Marcus asked quietly. "The relationship with Lily, your role as grandfather. What does that look like?" I took a breath, knowing that what I was about to propose would require changes I wasn't sure I was ready for, but needing to try anyway. "I would like to see her regularly," I said. "Maybe once a week at first, more if that goes well and if it works for your schedule. I want to learn about her routines, her preferences, what makes her laugh and what frightens her. I want to tell her stories about her mother, show her pictures and videos, help her build a connection to someone she'll never remember, but who loved her completely. I want to be someone she can count on, not a distant figure who shows up occasionally with expensive toys, but an actual presence in her life. I want to earn the right to be called grandfather, not just expect it because of biology." Marcus studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Lily had abandoned her pancakes and was playing with a paper napkin, folding and unfolding it with intense concentration, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above her head. "1 week at a time," Marcus said finally. "We'll try this for 3 months, see how it goes. You can visit on Sunday afternoons here at the diner first, neutral territory where Lily feels comfortable and where you can't overwhelm her with your mansion and your money. If that goes well, maybe we progress to visits at my apartment or short outings to the park. But the moment you start trying to control things, the moment you start criticizing my parenting or trying to change Lily into some version of who you think she should be, this stops." "Clear?" "Crystal clear," I said, relief washing over me that he was giving me this chance despite having every reason not to. "Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise." "I might," Marcus said honestly. "You might disappoint us. You might prove to be just as self-centered and controlling as Emily described, but she believed you could change, and I owe it to her memory to give you the chance to prove her right. Besides, Lily deserves to know her grandfather, if he's willing to do the work of actually being one." We finished our breakfast, and I insisted on paying despite Marcus's protests, pointing out that it was a tiny gesture compared to what I was asking for in return. When we left the diner, stepping back out into the late morning sun, Lily reached for me without prompting, and Marcus let her come into my arms, trusting me with his most precious possession even though I had given him minimal reason to. I held her carefully, aware of how fragile trust is, how easily it can be broken, how much I needed to prove myself worthy of this gift. "Same time next week?" I asked, and Marcus nodded. "Same time, same place," he confirmed. "And Mr. Harrison? Thank you. Not for the money, though I'd be lying if I said that won't help. Thank you for being willing to try, for not fighting me for custody, for respecting that Lily and I are a package deal. Emily would be happy about this, about us trying to figure this out together. Please," I said, "call me Richard, or just call me Grandpa, if you think Lily would understand that. Mr. Harrison is who I am in boardrooms and country clubs. I'd like to be someone different here, someone better." The weeks that followed were harder than I expected and more rewarding than I could have imagined. Every Sunday I would meet Marcus and Lily at the diner, and slowly, cautiously, we built something that resembled a family. I learned that Lily loved blueberries but hated strawberries, that she had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Floppy that she refused to sleep without, that she was afraid of loud noises but fascinated by running water. I learned that Marcus was taking night classes to become a licensed electrician, trying to build a more stable career that would give him better hours and more time with his daughter. I learned that Emily's paintings still hung throughout their small apartment, vibrant reminders of her presence and her vision, and that Lily would sometimes stand in front of them and say, "Mama," with a longing that broke my heart. I paid off the medical bills and the back rent and the credit card debt as promised, and watched Marcus's shoulders lose some of their constant tension when he realized he wasn't drowning anymore. I set up a trust fund for Lily's future, college or trade school or whatever she might choose, structured so it would be available regardless of her choices or my approval, a gift without conditions or expectations. But more importantly than the money, I showed up, every Sunday without fail, regardless of business trips or golf tournaments or social obligations that used to take priority over everything else in my life. I canceled meetings and turned down invitations and reprioritized my entire existence around this weekly commitment to a 2-year-old who was teaching me what love actually meant. I brought photo albums from Emily's childhood and told Lily stories about her mother's adventures. And I saw Marcus listening carefully, learning things about Emily he hadn't known, filling in gaps in his understanding of the woman he had loved. We laughed together over pictures of Emily covered in paint or making ridiculous faces, and we cried together over the reality that she wasn't here to see her daughter growing up, to witness this strange reconciliation she had orchestrated from beyond the grave. 3 months became 6 months became a year, and the diner meetings expanded to include visits to my house, which I began to see through Lily's eyes as ridiculously large and empty, echoing with the loneliness of a man who had valued square footage over meaningful connection. She would run through the halls giggling, her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for years, and I would watch her and Marcus navigate my wealth with neither intimidation nor resentment, just simple acceptance that this was part of who I was, neither better nor worse than the small apartment they called home. I started going to their apartment too, that cramped 2-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood that Emily had chosen, and I saw the life she had built there, the murals she had painted on the walls, the thrift store furniture she had transformed with fabric and paint, the tiny kitchen where she and Marcus had cooked together and dreamed together and created a family based on love rather than luxury. And I understood, finally, what she had been trying to tell me all along, that happiness isn't measured in square footage or bank account balances, that a rich life has nothing to do with money, and everything to do with connection, creativity, courage, and choosing authenticity over appearance. I think about that morning at the cemetery often, about how close I came to missing all of this, to letting my pride and prejudice rob me of the greatest gift Emily could have given me. I think about Marcus crying at her grave, demonstrating a depth of love I had never understood, holding a child I didn't know existed, and I'm grateful for his courage in keeping Emily's promise despite his justified fears. I think about Lily wrapping her tiny fingers around mine, choosing to trust me before I had earned it, offering me the same unconditional acceptance that Emily had always offered, and I had always rejected. And I think about Emily herself, my brilliant, brave daughter who loved me enough to give me one more chance at redemption, who believed that becoming a grandfather might open my closed heart and teach me what I had failed to learn as a father. She was right, as she so often was about things I refused to see. Lily has transformed me in ways I'm still discovering, teaching me patience and presence. showing me that the best moments in life happen in ordinary spaces with ordinary people doing ordinary things, like eating pancakes or reading picture books or building block towers that inevitably collapse into giggles and chaos. She has helped me understand that legacy isn't about the money you leave behind or the business empires you build, but about the love you give without expecting anything in return, about showing up consistently even when it's inconvenient, about choosing connection over control every single time. If you're reading this, if you've stayed with me through this entire story of loss and regret and unexpected redemption, I want you to understand something important. It's never too late to change, but it's also never too early to start being the person your loved ones need you to be. Don't wait until someone dies to recognize their worth, to appreciate their choices, to honor who they actually are, rather than who you want them to be. Don't let pride and prejudice and narrow definitions of success blind you to what actually matters. Don't waste years pushing away people who love you because they don't love you in the way you expected or demanded. Have you ever pushed someone away and regretted it deeply? Have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve but desperately needed? Have you ever learned the hardest lessons through the most painful losses? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes admitting our failures and sharing our growth helps others avoid making the same mistakes. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of relationships you need to repair or people you need to appreciate while you still can, please leave a like to let me know this message resonated with you. And if you want to hear more stories about life's hardest lessons, about redemption and transformation, about the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being human, please subscribe to Through My Eyes and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that might just change how you see the world and yourself. Emily taught me that it's never too early to choose love over pride, to choose connection over control, to choose the brave, authentic life over the safe, comfortable existence that looks impressive, but feels empty. She gave me Lily, and through Lily, she gave me a second chance at being human, at understanding what family really means, at learning that the richest life has nothing to do with money, and everything to do with showing up, being present, and loving without conditions or reservations. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me through the hard parts and the heartbreaking revelations, for bearing witness to my failures and my stumbling attempts at redemption. I hope it inspires you to reach out to someone you've been estranged from, to forgive someone who hurt you, to be forgiven by someone you hurt, to recognize that every day is an opportunity to choose differently, to love better, to be the person that the people in your life deserve. Don't wait until you're standing at a grave with a construction worker and a toddler to realize what you've been missing. Start today. Choose love. Choose connection. Choose the brave, authentic life. And remember, second chances are miracles we don't deserve but should never waste when we're fortunate enough to receive them.